For most of these rural, poor Alabamans and other people like them, they're voting for Trump for very rational reasons.
The question is how much does that genuine concern actually manifest itself in their behavior? Hey, what's up? Welcome to Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I am Troy Polidori.
And this week we are going to do the thing that we keep saying we're never going to do. We're going to talk about Trump. Thanks, Troy.
Well, only like indexically, right?
Yeah, that's a good point. We're going to delve into this article about Trump and his relationship to evangelicals in the United States. So it'll be a look, an examination at a particular church community, but it's got broader implications for the attachment, the fidelity of white evangelicals in particular to Trump and Trumpism, despite some of the glaring moral problems that seem to characterize Trump as a person. So we'll get into that. Also, just a reminder, our Patreon account is up and live. The newsletter went out for the first month. So for new patrons, you did not get the newsletter, but you will get the October newsletter, which will actually come out in a couple of weeks. So there'll be two newsletters rather close together, but that's just because I was trying to figure out what the fuck to do with the template, and Troy and I were trying to figure out how to structure it, but we sent it out, and we sent it out with some Dutch windmills because I forgot to replace the photos in the template.
I thought it was soothing, dude.
Yeah. So just enjoy those for those of you who did get that. But yeah, keep an eye out for that next month for the new patrons. We're at 17 patrons, which means we're darn close to opening it up to the peanut gallery for suggestions for future episodes. So if you want access to bonus episodes as well as being able to contribute to future episode topics, as well as the newsletter, go to patreon.com/owlsatdawn and get information on that.
So yeah, just a few more patrons and we can force Austin to talk about his manscaping.
Oh, you want to talk about manscaping? I've already tweeted about how you should put Manuka honey on your face for 20 minutes, a couple times a week. I'm down to talk about some manscaping. Listen, it's important to take care, look good, feel good, right? Change your haircut, change your life. Do you. Kill the Monday. What are the other cliches?
I know none of those.
You know none of those?
No.
You know what? That is not true because I tweeted once about how wonderful it was to get nose hair trimmers, and you were like, "Bro, you never done that before?" You're like, "I'm all about that."
How do you remember that? I don't even remember that.
And then you had a bidet in your old house.
I still do.
You guys, so
that's
know
about
what it's
not
like
being a caveman, though, dude.
Yeah, but that's still about enjoying the finer things in life, my friend.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. All right, so the first segment of the podcast, as always, gets things going before we get into the main segment. It's, as Troy likes to call it, the morning constitution. It's the shitty minute. It's where one of us releases that giant shard into the world out of the gaping anus, as Martin Luther liked to proclaim that he himself was. But it is that instant where we release the shard into the world. It's Troy's shitty minute. What is grinding your gear this week, or grinding your gears this week?
Nice mix of metaphors, dude. So my shitty minute this week is about the sort of influx recently of true crime documentaries, especially on Netflix. I guess Netflix, being Netflix, is trying to sort of dominate every single visual media form all at once.
Yeah, flood the market so you can kill the market? Is that what they're doing?
Exactly. And so they're releasing all these true crime documentaries. And surprisingly, it's on a wave that's existed in the podcast world too, right? With like Serial and whatnot. And true crime has always had that appeal for a certain segment of the population. And I myself enjoy a popular true crime documentary. I listened to Serial when it first came out and was super intrigued by it. And then it seems like, and I'm sure Serial was part of this too, there's this move towards the more pulpy side of true crime, where it seems like maybe in the past, I'm not a true crime expert certainly, but there was a time when true crime was sort of seen as more of a journalistic practice, maybe, or at least a story to be told, and not so much the pulpy side, which is probably more the origins of true crime, right? Like dime store novels and stuff like that. And so I watched, we all watched Making a Murderer a couple years ago, right? And I hated that one. It was super popular, but I couldn't stand it. And then I recently watched Evil Genius. Have you seen that one?
Mm-mm.
So Evil Genius and The Staircase are like the two kind of popular ones right now on Netflix, and
Okay.
I haven't watched The Staircase, but Evil Genius I watched, and it was entertaining. It held my attention. It's about this woman who was supposedly supposed to be involved in like a bank robbery that ended up with the bank robber claiming that he had a bomb tied around his neck or affixed to his neck, and that he was being forced to rob the bank. And everyone thought it was a hoax and it wasn't real, and then it blew up and he died.
Oh shit.
And so the documentary goes through a long, kind of tenuous string to tie this one woman who's kind of a psychopath, but also dealing with various other mental illnesses, and show that she was able to get away with this for a long, long time before eventually kind of being caught and found out. And then it turned out that she'd actually killed 2 previous boyfriends and gotten away with it. And so she's like this old super evil genius, right, who's gotten away with capital crimes for a long time. And you watch this documentary, and I'm spoiling all this, so apologies, but you probably shouldn't watch it anyway. You're watching this whole thing, and you're realizing, I realize at least, that even the way this is portrayed, it's called Evil Genius, but this person is neither evil nor a genius. She is extremely mentally ill and not a genius. The law enforcement system is just incredibly inept. And they just continually there was evidence against her that one agency would have, and then just forget to send it to the FBI or to the local police. And so no one would act on it. And then eventually 5 years later, they realize they've done that and then fix it. And it's like, so if complete ineptitude on the side of law enforcement is what causes someone to get away with a capital crime, does that make them a genius or just extremely lucky? And so that's just a critique of the Evil Genius thing. And I certainly didn't do any research on it. I'm not going to. So if any of what I'm saying doesn't make a lot of sense or doesn't actually work out, I don't really care. The point of it for me is this whole rush of true crime documentaries needs to make a choice. Either you're going to be dime store novels, and so you're going to go full pulp and be ridiculous and be exploitative and be movie style, which is fine. Do that. Or you're going to be serious and be journalistic and try and take actual crimes and do work on them in a visual documentary style. But it seems like they want to get both. Like they want to have the appeal of the pulp and the entertainment value of the pulp, but then also cast themselves off as being dispassionate journalistic practitioners. And that's just not happening, right? They're telling one side of a story in a way to make it the most entertaining and not to actually investigate a reality. Yeah. So true crime documentaries, make a choice.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm curious about our fascination with the true crime documentaries. Like, what does that say about us that we want to click on a 10-part series that's called Evil Genius? Why are we so fascinated with the extent of how horrible someone could be as long as it's clever, right? Like, I don't know. Is there something perverse about our fascination with needing to brand some person that's clearly disturbed, who's done some aberrant shit, and brand them as a genius? I don't know. There's something kind of strange about our fascination with that. And yeah. I'm not. It's not necessarily a condemnation, because I'm fascinated by it too. So there's something. I don't know. It's like we enjoy the things that we're afraid of. Maybe.
Yeah, it's like half watching a car crash, half riding a roller coaster, right? And getting that adrenaline that comes from like that just inner fear, the fact that your life's in someone else's hands. So that's fine. I'm not going to moralize about that and say that that's wrong, because it's just natural. We're all that way. Like, we all look at the car crash. Yeah. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what it is.
What part of human nature it is?
Yeah, that's what I mean. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to cut you off from saying. I'm just more curious as to what it is rather than making some sort of censorious judgment.
Oh yeah, exactly. I think that's fine. I'm talking more at like at the sort of entertainment level. Like I'm done with these. If we're just gonna have one true crime doc after another that's just like this, it's like, come on, man. Like you're
Yeah.
not fooling me into your like I'm a journalist thing, right?
Mm.
So just go full pulp. Just do it.
Mm.
Just go all the way. Like that's fine. But then we're not gonna take you seriously, so that's fine.
There was this Twitter feed. I can't remember who it was. I wish I could remember because I would direct people to it. It was a woman who is some sort of expert on like Victorian murderers, like woman Victorian murderers. And she did this long thread, a tweet thread. You could probably Google it. Just Google like Victorian female or murder. And there was this one that she did that was so fascinating about this woman who was in the upper classes, but there was a guy that was like a German. I think this is in the UK. He was like a German or something like that. And he was, like middle class or whatnot. And he would never be allowed to get with someone at her level, but he starts courting her secretly behind her father's back, and they start this torrid love affair, and then the father finds out, and they're not allowed to be with each other, and then there are all these illicit letters writing back and forth, and she says to her father that they're not together, and then they end up kind of sleeping together, which of course in the era of like the, whatever it was, like early 19th century, that was just the craziest thing. How could you sleep with somebody? So now they must get married because they've done the deed. So there's all this shit, and then it turns out that she finally does start to kind of pull away, but he won't let her go, and she ends up poisoning him with the hot chocolate, but she like laced it with cyanide or something. And then there's all this other stuff, and then she never gets caught for it. She changes her name, and then I think she maybe even kills somebody else again. She's on trial and she gets acquitted, and there's all this crazy stuff. But it was super fascinating because it was in the course of 20 little tweets, and so I felt like I got a whole novel or Netflix series in, I don't know, 20 minutes. It was actually fucking awesome. So
Yeah,
Google that shit.
I wonder what part of this has like this sociological bent to it, right? Where with Making a Murder and Evil Genius, especially, only two recent ones I've really seen, it's like the underclass, right? It's like poor white people usually, or at least sort of unsuccessful white people who are a little bit unhinged, right? And watching them do things that you just don't really understand because they're in a different sociological class than you are. And so I wonder if in Victorian kind of fiction, there's a similar bent because you have that similar, right, sharp bent of inequality between the upper and lower classes.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because like, don't they say that Jack the Ripper was actually like 12 different people, and it became one person because of media narrative?
Oh, is that right? I hadn't heard that.
Yeah, I bet there's something like that. I bet there's some kind of angle there that'd be interesting.
Have you ever heard my anecdote? I was chatting with, he's a philosopher named Andrew Benjamin. He was like a visiting professor or something like that in Dundee, or I can't remember what he was doing. But anyway, he was talking after the movie Blue Valentine came out, and he said that movie just really shows you how much America dislikes the white working class. And I was like, oh, that's kind of interesting. He's an Australian philosopher. And I was like, that's really interesting. I'd never thought about that before, but how much there's sort of just this like disgust towards the working class. And then we kind of were talking about it in the context of British chav culture and perceptions around like Neds in Scotland and things like that, and how there is a sort of distaste and a disgust and maybe a morbid fascination that goes along with the way that we relate oftentimes to individuals in different socioeconomic tiers, particularly the poorer working class tiers.
And I think that fascination, part of that's that we kind of know inside that, by the grace of God go I, in the sense of if I was born in different circumstances, that would have been me, We don't say that out loud, right? But inside we kind of know, damn, if I didn't have the particular circumstances that I grew up in, I could have been some hick in Alabama too.
So do you think part of it is the reason that people watch something like 16 and Pregnant is because we pat ourselves on the back and say like, yeah, by the grace of God go I, but also fuck, man, at least I'm not in that shitty situation. So there's kind of like we reassure ourselves and make ourselves feel better by watching the kind of plights of people that are not us. And I mean, that's maybe a cynical take on it, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that's unconscious. Like, I
Yeah.
don't think anyone would say that's a conscious thing for most people. But yeah, I mean, certainly part of the fascination of these kind of things is looking at a thing that you're just so glad you don't. It makes you feel better about yourself. You
Yeah.
don't have to experience that. Everyone needs a little bit of that after working 8 hours a day making money for somebody else.
Oh no,
At least I'm not doing
are you
that
gonna
shit.
are you gonna get all Euro Marxist on me? How the people in the industrial countries are more exploited than the global South because the rate of surplus is higher in the.
No,
Nah, no,
definitely not.
no, I'm kidding.
But there's that classic. What was it? Who said if you give white people someone to look down upon, they'll open their pockets for you, something like that.
Yeah, fucking white people. We're funny.
All right, so for our main segment, we're going to be talking about an article that was in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago, and it had a bit of a groundswell at the time, although that maybe it just was my particular echo chamber. But it's called Judgment Days, and I think it was even before titled something like God, Trump, and the Meaning of Morality. Maybe
Yeah.
they shortened it to Judgment Days after the fact. It's about a small Alabama town, and the evangelical congregation there and the pastor who preaches there dealing with their notion and sense of morality in the midst of what was admittedly for all of them a sort of confusing period. How to reconcile their overwhelming support for the Trump administration with their evangelicalism. And so the immediate context was the pastor of this Alabama evangelical church preaching through the Ten Commandments. And he got to the thou shalt not commit adultery, and he was going to preach on that commandment and trying to figure out how to talk about that in the midst of a political climate where immediately everybody would think of the adulterer in chief. And so the article does, I think, an interesting job of just letting the people speak without necessarily judging them, although maybe the framing can be judgmental. People can have that.
I did wonder that the selection of quotes in the order in which they come, they do lead to a particular type of narrative, a particular presentation of the congregation. But yeah, for the most part, it is nice to. I don't think it's a misrepresentation, but it's focusing us in a particular way.
Yeah, exactly. So some of those kind of key quotes come from some of the congregation members who are asked, how do they support somebody who clearly engages in immoral behavior from the perspective of Christian morality, traditional Christian morality, which they obviously deem to be an important factor even in their own pastor. I mean, there's several quotes about how they adore their own pastor because he is so moral and has all these virtues. He goes and visits orphans. He's extremely kind. He's full of spiritual passion and care for the people who are, kind of weak in the church. And
he cries when he does his sermons because he's super sincere.
Yeah, sincere was the word used several times, right?
Yeah.
And of course, those are all terms that don't come to mind with Trump, right? And you hear this a lot, I think, from people in leftist circles who see this seeming contradiction or tension and just lose their shit. For every single time Trump does anything that's insincere or perceived to be immoral, he's jumped, or the evangelicals in the country are jumped all over, and as if they're hypocrites, as if they don't realize it, or if they're just too dumb to realize it, or maybe they're just out and out hypocrites, like Pharisaical, and just want power and are willing to get it through any means, which I think is kind of laughable, since most of these people have no power, political power, that is, in a way that would be analogous to what the Pharisees were bad faith arguing for. Right? As if the argument's in bad faith is the idea. And I think all of those responses are extremely problematic. Would you agree with that?
I don't know if I would say they're all entirely problematic. They might be overgeneralizations. But so here I wrote down some questions. I'll be honest, man. I actually had a really difficult time reading this the second time. I read it once the first time you sent it to me. And then yesterday I was reading it in my office, and oh, it was tough, man. I got pretty teary-eyed reading this. Shit, I'm getting teary-eyed right now even thinking about it.
Yeah, but that's not saying
Um,
much for you.
yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point. I am a softie. But it was because even though I'm not actively a part of a church community and I have a lot of criticisms about Orthodox Christian thought and practice, I still view myself somehow as part of the Christian family, right? But experiencing just like serious crises of faith, that it's kind of, if I were to ever get involved with a religious community again, it would be some sort of like, either I'd be like Russian Orthodox or Greek Orthodox or something, like some sort of Eastern Orthodox, or it'd be like some sort of mystic community or some sort of social justice Anabaptist community. It's something like that, like there's no way I could be involved in any of the Orthodox traditions whatsoever. So it's kind of weird. But at the same time, there is still an attachment to the community of people that are deeply embedded in it. And it might be because I have family members who are so deep in it, and it's also partly just because I was so committed to it. Like, literally when you view the world as the sort of, I don't know, imperfect material expression, corrupted expression of God's hand for so long, it's so hard to break out of that. You have been constituted in a particular way, right? So it was really tough for me to kind of read through this. But one of the things that I couldn't help but wonder is this: is do you think that ever since the moral majority kind of monopolized the concerns of the evangelical population, with the two concerns being, abortion and gay marriage, right? Which is like the protection of the family and human dignity, and upholding God's moral law. Do you think that since the Republican Party has basically been the representative of this narrative in government, that the church has kind of just come along for the ride, so to speak, on like economic issues and other things? So the general evangelical population maybe really doesn't even care ultimately about like limited government and economic liberalism and things like that, but that they've just been so conditioned to accept kind of these positions as a consequence of their like radical invested primary libidinal commitment to the Republican Party. And so because of that, because they're so invested in this Republican Party, all that other stuff is kind of secondary. Simply to the Republican Party is God's protector in a world that is falling into what the Bible predicts in the book of Revelation at the end times. And so therefore there is a bad faith. There is a sense of bad faith. It doesn't matter the moral positions of any representative in the Republican Party. It doesn't matter if their economic positions are irrational. It doesn't matter if their moral positions, if their moral behavior in their own life is aberrant. It doesn't matter, because the party itself still represents the kind of larger, in their mind, structural moral ideas, and there is a sense in which that's bad faith.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't think that it is actually bad faith in most people's minds. I think self-consciously they are sincere about their beliefs. Now, that's most is the key kind of term there. There are people like Billy Graham's kid and Jerry Falwell's kid and some of the other sort of evangelical leaders who've really risen up in the last 2 years. And they're clearly in bad faith because they're like trying to argue that Trump's actually made a heel turn. Is a heel turn always bad, or can you have a good heel turn?
No, a heel turn I think is bad because the heel is when you go bad, but I know what you mean.
It's a reverse heel turn.
I think you call it a face when there's the heel in the face, right?
A face turn or an about face?
Yeah, I think that's the good guys. The good guys are called the face, I think. I can't remember.
Okay.
I'm not a big WWE guy.
So well, Trump is. So the argument is that he, actually during the campaign had a coming to belief moment and accepted the Holy Spirit and became a Christian, and everything before that doesn't count now because he's actually And of course, you look at his behavior and it's exactly the same as it was before. So, and of course, even if he had changed his behavior, it would be obvious that it was done for the sake of the campaign and not for anything else. And that's obviously in bad faith. And I think pretty much everybody reading that knows that. The people in this article, though, I think express themselves fairly consistently in saying they're not comfortable with his personal moral decisions. But they're following a pretty typical kind of utilitarian logic, which is that, yeah, I'll vote for somebody who I think is an immoral person if I think that their actions are going to have byproducts that are moral, that are morally good. That's a very consistent utilitarian logic, and they may be flawed in terms of the arguments they present, but the logic behind them is not irrational necessarily.
No.
And so I think the key point for me is not to accuse most of these people of hypocrisy unless it's really blatantly done for the sake of, a cash grab, like with some of these evangelical leaders. For most of these, rural, poor Alabamans and other people like them, they're voting for Trump for very rational reasons, and they had trouble with the decision. They had to think about it. They had to rationalize. Right, and they even one of the people in the article even admits that it's rationalization, although I'm unsure if they're using the term in the sense that we would use it.
Here, I think there's a distinction. I think there are some people who genuinely say, and I think some of these people in the article exhibit the behavior that you're talking about to varying degrees. I think some of them, from what I read, seemed like they actually struggled more. And then there were a couple, for example, there was an 82-year-old woman, and there were these two other women later who seemed to be much more spiteful about certain concerns that dictated their decision-making. Whereas there was another individual, I can't remember the names or the ages and stuff, but seemed that that person struggled much more with the decision, including the pastor of the church. It seemed that because he talks about this, how I talk about this with my wife all the time, and the other person said that too. I talk with my partner all the time, and we struggle through this because the Bible says one thing and clearly I'm saying something else. So I think you even see a variety of voices in the article that exhibit what you're talking about, that kind of presents a spectrum. So I agree with you, but at the same time, I think some of the voices in this article open us up to other voices within the evangelical community, that there's a sincerity in their fear, there's a sincerity in their concern for their well-being, there's a sincerity in their concern for their perceived moral decline in the United States that they want to see reversed, whether that be because abortion is to them the great crime because it's murdering little babies. The pastor even wears on his lapel like a little pin of baby feet or something like that. So this doesn't mean that there's no genuine concerns whatsoever underpinning their frameworks. But the question is how much does that genuine concern actually manifest itself in their behavior? Or are they just simply ad hoc legitimizing their fear of the other? And I think some of them clearly demonstrate the sort of, let's, in Prozorov terms, some of these people might be more reactive, but I think there's definitely a fascistic logic in a lot of this, that they are actively suppressing the other because they're afraid that the immigrant, the Muslim, like one of the persons even said that like Obama was a Muslim, he carried a Quran around in the article. That person is not, I don't think, acting in good faith. That person is justifying their bad faith through a rational argument.
Well, I would just think I would want to break down that distinction a little bit, in that I think these people are sincere while also engaging in post hoc rationalization, because that's how human reasoning works 99.9% of the time. We're just naturally looking for patterns in things rather than investigating them to their fullest extent and challenging our beliefs. That's just not an effective way of getting through life as a hunter-gatherer, right? So that's how the human mind tends to work, and we have to actually work pretty hard at training ourselves to do otherwise, and it's extremely difficult to do, especially when you are older and have done otherwise for a long, long time. So I think that these people are sincere and also spiteful. I think the spite is the other side of the kind of sincerity. And remember, by saying sincerity here, I'm not saying good, right? I do think
no, it's an authentic concern because of a fear.
Yeah, I think their fear goes hand in hand with that. I think people that are spiteful towards Clinton, one person in the article says that if Clinton was in power, then it would be a dangerous place for people like me. And there's several references to Christianity being attacked and being eradicated,
Yeah.
annihilated, and all these terms which are clearly factually incorrect, right? And are usually come from various uh, email. What do you call those things? Chain letters, chain emails.
Yeah.
That some 13-year-old in Macedonia creates, and then it comes to your 82-year-old grandmother. But at the same time, I don't think that we should just call these people hypocrites and be done with it. It's a really easy way to dismiss what's actually happening. That does not mean you have to admit that they have a good argument, or say that that's worthy of, a long-winded, dispassionate critique. Maybe it is worthy of dismissal on factual grounds, but you don't actually get anywhere by either hand-waving or using the hypocrisy card. I think that we should understand that these people are engaging in the kind of rationalization that all humans do. It's a hallmark of conspiratorial thinking in general, which all humans are prone to think that a group that one is a member of is under attack by people who have ungodly amounts of power and often work in the shadows. Lots of people think that to various degrees. And to think that, to be a white Christian in America and think that Christianity is being under attack because you had a black president who himself had no moral scandals and was married once and has 2 kids who are pretty much blameless, other than they smoked weed one time. To look at that and see that as sort of an attack on Christianity clearly is bordering on delusional, right? But the key is to look for, I think, whenever you have like post hoc rationalization, that happens because there's a certain belief that someone holds on to dearly. And that belief will not change. It cannot change. It's part of their identity, right?
Right.
And then everything else around that belief needs to fit into a puzzle to justify it. And so all those other things can be rearranged in whatever way is necessary to justify that one belief. Now, we would hope that if someone was a sort of Bible-believing Christian, that one belief would be something like, love thy neighbor unconditionally, or the Beatitudes, right? Blessed are the poor and blessed are the meek, and so on and so forth.
There's neither Jew nor free, nor slave nor free, or Jew nor Greek, nor slave nor free, nor man nor woman, for all are one.
Yeah, don't say there's no Jews, dude, because then you're going to be accused by that New York Times of being anti-Semitic.
But there's no Greeks either. Am I anti-Grecian?
Yeah, you would hope it'd be something like high-minded and conceptual like that, right? But of course, people don't always read the Bible with conceptual thinking like Paul was using. So what is it about, what is their belief that leads them to look at a passage like love thy neighbor and say, love thy American neighbor? That's what one of the...
and that's literally what they said in the article.
Yeah. And welcome strangers into your land. And they meant, no, legal strangers, not illegal ones.
Right.
And care for the least of these. No, the least of these that are American.
Right.
And this is said in one part of the article, which is really the most jarring statement, right? Because it's clearly taking very clear passages where poor people and immigrants and people you don't know, neighbors, meaning people that aren't part of your normal sort of tribal collective, and saying you need to love them as much as you love your own group, and then taking that and twisting it to mean the exact opposite. What could lead someone to, I think in good faith, really think that way? And the only thing I can come to is that American Christianity took a turn at some point. And probably what you're talking about before with the marriage of conservative economic thinking with what we now call kind of conservative Christian morality has a big part of that turn. And it's pretty unrecognizable, I think, historically as Christianity in a lot of ways. And there's some similarities that you can point to, like things like marriage and family and stuff like that, right? But that exists in all as a conservative form of morality in all forms of society. It's not unique to Christianity or anything. And American Christianity now privileges some sort of like American cultural status or signifier that it wants to hold on to, like the idea of being somehow privileged as a Christian, or that America has some sort of Christian identity to it, which goes hand in hand with being white as well, and that's under attack. And that seems to be the belief that can't go.
Yeah, we talked about this a little bit. I don't remember actually if we did talk about it, but with we did, yeah, with Jeff Sessions' use of Romans 13 to justify the separation of families at the border. And we talked about how it was a post hoc rationality. And it's the idea of somehow you take the legal codes or the cultural codes that you've become accustomed to, the American legal codes, American immigration laws, American economic laws, American cultural values, American music, the type of dresses that people wore in the 50s, the way that a suit is worn, whatever. You take those codes, the type of food that we eat, whatever, and you take those and you universalize them, and then you interpret the Bible through those presuppositional frames. And so the immigrant, even though if you look at the context of the Old Testament, when God is chastising Israel for not welcoming the foreigner or the stranger in their midst, it's not, hey, you guys should have a legal operation by which you assimilate foreigners into your midst. That notion of legal representation didn't exist at the time in the way that it does now. So there's a forced imposition. It's a forced hermeneutical imposition of the American codes that they take as the prism by which they interpret the world, that they then impute back onto their interpretation of the Bible. And there's a push and a pull then, because then they also take their theological presuppositions and they interpret the American culture through that lens. So the reason that the music and the clothes and whatever else that they have kind of taken as their prism of American culture are valued is because they are seen to map onto the presuppositional theological orientation they have. So there is a really tense like dialectical relation between these two prismatic ways of viewing the world. And it's not so easy to just simply say they're just bad faith, they're just simply about power, just simply. So when I say that I think that there's an element of bad faith, I already presume the sincerity, right? I already presume that these are family members. I think I'm just more frustrated with the blatant overgeneralizations, conflations of terms, inability or unwillingness, because I think it's both. I think there's an unwillingness and I think there's literally an inability. I think that Christians a lot of times are incapable of thinking. I think a lot of us are. We're incapable of thinking outside of our quote-unquote worldviews, right? This is the evangelical community that we were a part of used to talk about worldviewism, right? And it was this sort of idea that we are blinded by our presuppositions. And of course, they marry it to this notion of the old sin nature and shit like that. And you have to have a sort of new nature so that you can change your prism by which you interpret the world. But I think that there's something true about that. And so there's an incapability of evangelicals that then conditions an unwillingness as well. And then again, there's a dialectical tension between the unwillingness and the incapability. So how much are they unwilling versus how much are they incapable? I mean, they kind of reinforce one another. Their inability and their unwillingness sort of strengthen each other in the way that they engage with the world. So they're incapable of seeing the world from a different perspective, as well as them being unwilling. But I'm so frustrated with that because, especially with the issue of Trump, let's say, as being the most kind of contracted and clearly obvious point of tension with Christian orthodoxy, because he is, by any definition of the term, he is a false prophet. He's not just simply somebody who represents a point of tension for Christians to think through with their moral basis. He literally uses the Bible and says that it's his favorite book and does that fake acting when he's having prayer meetings in the White House. He literally uses that for power. This is not an exaggeration. That is the fucking definition of a false prophet according to the Christian tradition.
Yeah, contrast that with Nebuchadnezzar, right? Which is what the pastor says Trump may be more like. Someone who unwittingly is used by God for God's purposes. Well, there's a huge difference, right?
Yeah, or Pharaoh, like Christians like to say. Like Christians like to talk about it. Even God used Pharaoh.
They were verbally antagonistic towards God's plans. And
the whole time.
Yeah, exactly. And then God miraculously uses that against them, so to speak. Trump is not that. He is, if anything, sinning against the Holy Spirit, right? By using
which is the unforgivable fucking sin.
Yeah, right. There is no account of someone who claims to be for God with every breath is actually totally against that in private, right? And even in practice, when you look at it analytically enough, and then actually is being used by God, and like a 3D chess move, like that's not a thing. There's no biblical context for that.
No, but you know what? This doesn't really surprise me, because remember when Christians fully put their support behind Mitt Romney, and there was like 1 minute of conversation about, oh, but he's also a devil worshiper. Should we do that? And they were like, that's cool, whatever. He's the Republican Party representative. And what I mean by that is not that he actually is a church of Satan, but Christians believe that Mormons worship the devil.
Conservative evangelicals do.
Conservative evangelicals, yeah, sorry. Conservative evangelicals literally think that because any false religion is ultimately a religion of the devil. Like, literally, it's a deception of Satan. So, therefore, if you worship a false god, if you worship the false Jesus, and conservative evangelicals will say that he worships a different Jesus. And by that, they mean a false Jesus. Literally, when you talk with them, they will say that Mormons worship the devil. They voted for him in huge swaths. So,
which is totally irrational if you think that you can sort of hand wave away that stuff or sort of post hoc justify it, because the real most important thing for you isn't sort of executing Christian morality on a public stage. The most important thing for you is sort of developing this fantasy of an American Christian culture, which is dominant in society, and that all forces that in any way are in tension with that are put to the margins or eradicated. And if that's the most important, that vehicle, moving that Christian culture in America vehicle, is the most important thing for you, then you can easily justify voting for Romney and even for Trump. It's really not, it's a difficult decision in the sense that you may not like it, but it's pretty clear what you should do if those are your priorities.
So our old mentor and I had a brief chat actually during the Trump election, and I asked him this very question. And this is somebody who is trained in philosophy, who is a very, very sincere man, who genuinely was probably one of the most concerned individuals for other people that I've ever met in my life, okay? I mean, he is an extremely, extremely good dude, okay? Troy and I love this man, you know? He may probably have issues with us now, but he meant a lot to us when we were younger. Yeah. And I asked him about this, and I said, this is a consequentialist logic, brother. And he said, no, it's not consequentialism. It's hierarchical ethics, is how he explained it to me. And I think that I don't buy that, but what he meant by that is that there are, rather than thinking of this linearly, where it's, you know, you do something, like think of a timeline, that you do something here so that later you can realize the end, and then the end justifies the means. It's not that, according to him. It's that it's more of a vertical thing, that there are layers of ethics that are on top of each other. And sometimes, in order to kind of appeal or to stimulate that highest node or that highest layer of ethics, you have to engage at the shittier level of ethics. And I've never been able to shake that from my mind, because I can see the logical strength that it holds from within his own framework. But it's so insidious to me, because it still is a consequentialism, but it just kind of, and it's more than just a spatial metaphor, but it shifts the spatial metaphor. Instead of it being you're only doing one thing so that you can do another, it's that you can't actually separate all of these things, and they're all in this like sticky, tense, like overlapping together, and that decisions are just hard, but ultimately I'm serving the kingdom of God by serving the greatest good, is kind of how he elaborated it to me.
Yeah, I think my question would be, what places certain things higher on the hierarchy than others? Is it not their consequences? Because if
Right.
so, then that's a consequentialist logic.
It's still a
Indirectly.
consequentialist logic, right?
Yeah. So, and I mean, maybe that's not. You could have like a deontological set of right and wrong things that are on a hierarchy just naturally, and maybe that's the kind of thing these people would go for if they were more analytically inclined. And you can certainly make a justification for that. Like, you can develop a logic around that, and it can be very convincing if you hold to the same sort of priors, right? I think the whole point of this is just we shouldn't look at these people as a sideshow or as like a freak show or as a bunch of people who just eventually need to die and then things can get better, because that kind of hope never actually succeeds. It's both wrong and it never succeeds. So it's ineffective and I think morally problematic.
Right.
I think these people, probably most of them aren't going to be reached, right? Even in like the greatest possible scenario that could happen. But they're not freaks. When these people talk about the end times, and there's lots of talk about this in the article, right? People hoping for heaven and talking about how it will be, and engaging in all sorts of like contradictions about physical existence in heaven, even though I'm not sure they believe that there is a physical existence, and all sorts of things, right?
Right.
When they talk about this stuff, they're not really letting that sort of mystical, weird, contradictory beliefs motivate their current political choices. What that's saying instead is they're producing a narrative that makes sense of their political choices. That's what they're doing. When they talk about the end times coming soon, most people aren't really thinking that Left Behind series is going to actually become nonfiction. What they're really thinking is the world's getting worse, and they have to have a very rich narrative to justify that. And the thing is, everybody has these narratives. Pretty much everybody thinks that the world's getting worse in their own generation, right? Now, we may be correct. We'll have to investigate that, look at the data and see, right? And some people have the opposite view, like the Pinkers. And they think that the world's getting better. And that's, I think, also pretty problematic, and oftentimes just a post hoc justificatory narrative as much as the end time stuff is. But I think if we see it as that, it's a narrative that they're using to make sense of their world, because we all have to have narratives to make sense of our worlds, to give our actions and our lives any sort of meaning. If we just stare at the heat death of the universe and think about that and let that guide our political choices, we're not going to make any, right? We're just going to become hopeless and morose and sitting in our rooms and be fatalists. We can engage these people. You can actually try and talk to them. And some of them are going to just yell at you on Twitter, so there's nothing you can do about it, right? But I think if we spent more time trying to understand why regular people think the way they do, without just calling them freak shows or side shows or laughing at them or whatever, but instead trying to point out, hey, this is part of your own narrative, the Christian narrative, and it's very different than the one you're presenting. I think that that's a lot more hopeful than either calling them freak shows or just talking about how much in bad faith their leaders are. As much as that might be true, right?
Yeah.
Those are not the people you're going to win over. You're not going to win over Jerry Falwell Jr.
Yeah, and this is one of the things I need to get better at reconciling in my own life, because I want to save them all, Troy. I've got the sort of death of God post-evangelical spirit, where it's like, no, the pressure's on me to go out there and convert them, man. Because it's true that there are individuals that I will be able to make more translational points of commonality with than others. Individuals like my father or my uncle are going to be very difficult to reach. But I don't know, man, maybe that's okay. Here's one of the things I really struggle through a lot, and I've been thinking about this. I'm thinking about how to articulate this. I think that one of the main reasons that we have a difficult time, that let's say the secular world has a difficult time understanding or communicating with the Christian world. And I mean, like, when I'm saying the Christian world, I'm speaking about American evangelicalism here and its exports around the world. is that that latter tradition views the world through the lens of soteriology and eschatology, salvation and the culmination of that salvation in heaven. And the two cannot be separated. They are always the kind of primary grid by which they interpret the world, themselves, everything else, right? And so part of the reason that, like, they, for example, are resistant to narratives around socialism, for example, is because they think of socialism as being a threat or like some sort of replacement to Christianity. That somehow socialism, Marxism, anti-capitalism, some sort of progressive, even like the tamer, like social democratic progressivisms, are viewed as being some sort of replacement for the soteriological and the eschatological. Now, part of this is the problem of progressives and of Marxists and socialists, because there is a little bit of a soteriological and eschatological narrative. They do seem to kind of say that, no, that this communist utopia will be the point at which there's no more suffering and the lion will lay down with the lamb. That narrative is there, and I think that that's fundamentally problematic. I don't think that that's what an anti-capitalist sentiment is or is supposed to be. But there's this stopgap that prevents Christians and socialists from communicating so often because they don't understand this primary point of tension. Because the socialist is maybe not even aware of their own soteriological and eschatological logic that they are using. And then the Christian is very aware, and they think that the other person is trying to just say, no, you don't need the church. Fuck Christianity, because Marx was an atheist and he was hostile to Christianity. Therefore, communism is some sort of replacement of the church. And so there's this, they're not even able to communicate with each other. And so one of the things I've been thinking through is that let's, and I'm using the socialist point just as a microcosm of larger concerns, but in discussions with people about progressive politics or socialist politics, I think that the part of that is on us for our confusion of what exactly it is that we're offering when we engage with an anti-capitalist narrative. And so there's a guy named Dan Barber who we've mentioned a couple times on the podcast, and he's working on this 2-volume series that I don't think is out yet, but it's called Against Conversion. And I'm really curious to see what I've heard him talk about this. Have you heard him talk about this too, Troy?
I haven't heard about it at all, no.
So he seems to think, and I'm literally, I've heard him talk about it for like 5 minutes on various interviews or when he's given papers, and he said, I'm working on this thing, but it's not done yet. And so I don't even know if the first volume is out yet, but I don't think it's out yet from the last I looked, just like a month ago or 2 months ago. But it's arguing against the centrality of this soteriological and eschatological logic that has inflicted itself into the secular narratives of the world that are just the obverse of the Christian narrative rather than being an actual break from the Christian narrative. So that there are secular versions of salvation and eschatology that kind of define, if you will, that framework of thinking. And that to me is highly problematic. That to me is something that doesn't really fit into what a Marxist critique of political economy ought to be, or even what the critique of religion ought to be in Marx. I don't think even though he does say in some of his earlier writings he wants to like realize the genuine cries of the religious, but within political frameworks or through a political lens or in political means. Even if he does kind of maybe in his earlier days think, hey, maybe there is a sort of like political salvific sense, maybe he's fucking wrong, first of all. Maybe we shouldn't do that. But even more than that, if you look at the sort of like continuation of his work in the critique of political economy, that's not what an anti-capitalist orientation is. It's not about salvation, and it's not about the culmination of heaven here on earth. And I think that provides a very difficult hurdle to overcome in our engagements with such individuals. And I think this just goes down to what we were talking about earlier, is that there's this inability to engage even sometimes because of the very different ways that people view the world. So we need to understand how each other think if we're going to try to build out any point of commonality whatsoever. And even if we can't save the Jerry Falwells or reach, I'm not trying to save, even if we can't reach the Jerry Falwells or the Billy Graham Jr.'s or whatever the fuck his name is. What's his name? It's not Billy Graham Jr. It's
call him Graham Jr.
Graham Jr. Graham Jr., Graham Crackers. If we're not going to reach them, if I'm not going to reach my father or my uncle, and somehow they're going to start voting for Bernie Sanders or my ticket that I'm doing with AOC in 2028, if they don't vote for us, maybe, nevertheless, there could be a sense in which we can build out some sort of commonality, in which I could maybe learn from them somehow and become more caring and more kind and more patient in my engagements with people that think differently from me. And there are still.
That's the key,
go ahead.
right? It's not just about how you vote; it's about how you live. I mean, how you vote is just a very small microcosm about how you live,
right?
And that's the point we're trying to get to, right? I mean, you were talking a minute ago, and I absolutely agree that I think the kind of vulgar materialist account of religion is just wrong. The idea that religion is entirely an epiphenomenon of material conditions is just incorrect. It's historically incorrect, and it's materially incorrect. And I think that bleeds into a lot of people's, the left's sort of automatic dismissal of all things religious, which is funny when you look at the history of sort of anti-institutional and even kind of socialistic movements are largely religious because people have been largely religious throughout history.
Right.
And so there hasn't been a problem marrying those two things together because just everybody is religious in some sense. And that goes back a little bit to the problem with defining what religion is. But I do think we need to get rid of that vulgar materialism. That goes back to ideas we've talked about in the podcast before, which is, if you don't have this vulgar materialism, but instead you have this kind of, what do we call it? Like idealistic materialism or materialistic idealism or whatever. If ideas are also material, and you include that in your definition of material, which is this kind of heterodox kind of materialism. It's not really materialism then anymore. If you allow that, then you have a whole new set of factors that are at play that you can use and that can be used against you in forming society. And so I think we have to start, as philosophers, have to start on that ground level, really rethinking how we think about people's beliefs, whether they're religious or not. And what kind of role they play, how they're formed, and what role they play in their actions. And then be able to use that, whatever we come out with academically, and engage with people in a very different way than we currently are, which is largely through dismissal of people who disagree with me and automatic approval of those who agree.
Yeah, and I think that the vulgar materialist understanding of religion, because I think it still has that its own soteriological and eschatological narrative in it, it makes people less patient. Here's the thing: is like, I don't know. I'm not sure how to it's like I can almost taste it, but I don't know how to put words to it. It's like that criticism from the left seems to reproduce the same sort of urgency that you get with like Jehovah's Witnesses. Right? Like the apocalypse is coming, man.
Yeah, here's the thing, dude. If religious belief is just an epiphenomenon of material conditions, then so is Marxist belief. It falls under the exact same critique.
Yeah.
Right? It's all just epiphenomenal ideology. And that's it. So it's sort of, I think, totally counterintuitive in that sense. If you dismiss religion, then the problem is religion is very, very broadly defined. Should be, at least, if you're going to actually use it as a catch-all term. It's going to include political ideological beliefs too. And at that point, you just give up on the idea of actually forming or actually like having like political practice or social formation at all. You go down that road of like the ultra vulgar materialism where just all you have to do is like turn a couple switches and get your output of a better society.
Right. Exactly. I mean, it was a really fascinating read. Like I said, man, I had a tough time with it in a good way. It was kind of, I don't know, made me think a lot about, our old university and family members and discussions I have with them. I engage with a lot of Christians still through Facebook discussions and Twitter and things like that. And I got mad love. I think my frustration really boils down to the fact it's different from an outsider who, like Bill Maher or something, that is like, these people are just fucking idiots, and he has that documentary called Religulous that it's so snarky and dismissive and condescending, and it really shows that he's kind of a misanthrope. Well, he's a fucking narcissist more than anything, but it shows a sort of
too.
and wrong,
all the way around.
yeah. But there's something about that negative affect that I just find so distasteful, and so I'm automatically not coming at it from that perspective. It's like I'm upset, man. It's almost like in a non-orthodox sense, it's like the grieving of the Holy Spirit when I read this stuff, like it hurts, man. It really bums me out. I just want to he's a fucking false prophet, man. He's not. This isn't hierarchical ethics. It's not Nebuchadnezzar, man. This is not fucking Pharaoh here. I don't know. It bums me out. And I think what it is more than anything that bums me out is that it's almost it's affecting me and my attachments to the church still. And so when I read that, it's less about me being frustrated with them exclusively as it is me being frustrated with the image that I have been attached to that is Christianity. And I think that's it. It's this thing that I think I loved, or this thing that still defines me in some ways, even in maybe a negative differential relation, that thing is crumbling, and it's showing itself to maybe be even more problematic as the time goes by. And that, I think, hurts. It's that epistemological crisis, but it's like there are certain points. It's like maybe I've never gotten out of it, but there are certain points at which it measures higher on the Richter scale. And reading this article definitely was a tick,
Yeah, it's the same for me. I mean, for those who didn't grow up or have our experience and don't have a way of sort of producing an analogy of experience for themselves, imagine you were in a band when you were in high school, and it was like your greatest memory, just being in that band was the most fun thing you've ever done in your life. And then you realize, like 10 years later, one of the members of that band just took all of your recordings and sold them to fucking E-Trade, and they're used in E-Trade commercials or something. The ultimate bastardization of something you thought was pure and holy and good, or could be at least, that, but times 1,000, or include that as part of your identity. That's what it feels like. It feels like a sort of betrayal.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But it's a really fascinating article. I think people should check it out. WAPO, what's it called again? Judgment Days?
Judgment Days.
Yeah, Judgment Days, WAPO, really interesting. And I talked about this in the newsletter. I think this is just one of those ways to help us to, really listen to the other and hear the other. To really try to stimulate empathy with people who they do have sincere concerns, and it's just that those concerns are going to be very different maybe from your own, or maybe they're not different from your own, because we have certain evangelicals that listen to this too, but I don't know. Yeah, check out the article. I'm tired. I'm wrecked. This article,
well,
it fucked me up, man.
Austin, since I made you talk about Trump indirectly, and I know that was a gravest sin of mine, I'm going to give you the sticky leaves for today.
Oh, I feel like that was just scheduling, but thanks, man.
Hey, man, it can be scheduling and it can be my gift to you. There's no mutual exclusion there.
Deal.
You're a both and guy, right? Both and.
I am a both and guy.
So this next segment, the Sticky Leaves, where one of us talks about whatever it is that's bringing hope and meaning to our lives. Which I'm gathering from Austin's countenance, he needs to have right now to brighten the day a little bit. So Austin, what are your Sticky Leaves?
Okay, I'm shaking it off. Are you ready? I tweeted out a photo the other day of a barge that has barges on top of it, then ships on top of that. And someone said, hey, it's a shipping ship shipping ships, right? Now, this is going to get confusing for people, but just bear with me on this. This is going to be fun. We're going to get into some logic here. We're going to break down chucking, woodchuckers, chuckers, blah, blah, blah. We're going to break down that shit, and we're going to apply this to this meme. Are you ready, Troy?
No.
It was this huge shipping ship, like a ship, like this massive ship. You know, like those Maersk shipping ships. But it was a ship that ships those massive shipping ships, right? So there was this meme, and it was kind of funny, and I kind of did a little take on the how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood meme. And it was, just by looking at it, you would say, okay, so if it's a shipping ship, it's not just a ship, right? It's not just like a big boat, like a yacht, which would just be a ship, but it's actually a shipping ship that's being shipped on top of another ship. Okay, so then the very simple way that you would think is, if you were going to do that rhyme, the tongue twister, then you would say, well, you know, so how many ships could a shipping ship ship if a shipping ship could ship ships, right? That would be the basic way of looking at it. But then I started looking at this photo, and I started saying, it's more complex than that. Because they're not just shipping ships. They're not just ships that ship shipping ships. They're shipping shipping ships. And so I did this thing as like, how many shipping ships could a shipping ship, blah, 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 blah. And it got really complex. And some people were like, wait a second, does this work? And Troy even said last week, I think you're saying this wrong. And then I had buddies that contributed it. So I figured out, here's an easy way to break it down. Are you ready? It all derives from the how much wood could a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood. Let's break this down. What we have here is we have a sort of, it's seemingly complex, but it's a very simple, let's break it down into nouns versus verbs. It's how many, and then enter how much of a noun could another noun, and then verb, if that noun could verb those nouns, right? So it's how much wood, which is a noun, could a woodchuck, another noun, chuck, which is a verb, if a woodchuck, noun, could chuck, verb, that wood, back to the noun. So let's just insert little logical quantifiers here, right? So how many A's could a B X if a B could X A's, right? Very simple. You could apply this to anything. How many raindrops could a bear eat if a bear could eat raindrops? How many fans could Austin dry if Austin could dry t-shirts? How many pizza boxes could fly around the world if pizza boxes could fly around the world? Something like that, right? It's how many A's could a B X if a B could X A? It's very simple logical paradigm, right? So now all we have to do is plug in the fucking units, my friend. So what are we looking at here in this picture? And then how do we want to do it? So, like, are they shipping ships? Are they ships that shipping ships? Are they shipping shipping ships? Are they shipping ships? I don't know how to. So how do we define what these entities are? And that will help us to understand how to come up with this little tongue twister. What do you think, Troy? You down for this?
I mean, no, but I can also say that what are these sentences called? There's a name for these kind of sentences, like buffalo, buffalo, buffalo.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like dog, dogs, something like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Where a word can be used both as the noun and a verb, right? And so you can use this indirect object, direct object, all this sort of stuff, right? Do you know what these are called? These kind of sentences? I forget.
I can't remember what they're called.
So there's actually a place in analytic philosophy of mind that deals with these. Because the argument that I've heard is that these are good evidence that intentionality has a sort of phenomenal in the sense of experiential element to it. And I guess a lot of analytic philosophers deny that, which sounds kind of crazy because you come from the continental tradition, like, you know, phenomenology and stuff, and of course it has an experiential dimension to it. But I guess a lot of analytic philosophers are, you know, naturalists, and so they want to deny there's a, you know, sort of unique quality to intentionality. And so you can use these sentences to talk about how I could say the sentence buffalo, 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 and to you it just sounds like me saying the word buffalo repeatedly with no actual sense to it. There's no meaning, right?
Right.
But then if I said, well, buffalo, to buffalo someone means, does it mean to trick someone? Something like that? I think. And so buffalo can buffalo, right? And now you think about it, oh, okay, you hear the exact same sentence, and it produces a different experience, one where you understand. There's a different sort of experience to that. And so that's used as evidence of the thesis that you can have like an intentional phenomenology. Riveting,
No, but
right?
I mean, I'm fascinated. I am so fascinated by this. But I just thought the meme was funny, and I enjoy stupid shit like this. You know how we complain about the internet sometimes, and I do think there are things that are problematic about the tempo and the pace at which social media sort of drives social relations and the demands that it imposes upon us, and the rate at which it extracts affective and emotional labor and things like that. But at the same time, man, sometimes there are memes that they entertain me, or they make me laugh, and I actually found myself not being able to sleep because I kept coming up with more and more complex ways of articulating this little tongue twister.
Don't you remember the good old days when the internet was just that stuff?
Was it ever? I just remember MySpace was really, I mean, it was AOL Instant Messenger, and then I would do fantasy sports, and then MySpace. That was really my foray into the internet, and then porn.
Yeah, like we
At my grandpa's
we
house.
need to nationalize the internet and make sports.com and
porn.com.
porn.com and oldtwitter.com, which is where you're not allowed to express political opinions unless you do so in a very ironic, but not in the distasteful sense of irony, but in the playful sense of irony.
Too many qualifications. We can't do it, dude. We got to simplify this.
No, we'll have a czar of the internet, and this person will make sure that all this stuff actually follows suit.
I nominate
It'll be a much
as
better
my secretary
world.
of philosophy.
Oh my god, I would jump off of so many cliffs.
Oh, Jesus. Yeah, I don't remember that ever being... I wasn't on early Twitter. I jumped into Twitter late in the game, so I never got to see the idyllic past.
You're right that like all the bad shit was like on MySpace back then, and now it's Facebook, right? Facebook's the terrible thing, and Twitter's like halfway there, or maybe 3/4 of the way there. And so we need to go back to when we all thought the internet was not very important. It wasn't going to change our lives. When we started giving it that importance, that's when everything kind of went to shit.
It almost sounds like some sort of religious performative logic that you're implying took place.
Oh, we sacralized it?
Yeah.
We kind of did, right? It's going to save us. It's going to democratize everything. It's a horizontalism.
People still say that.
But now we all know it's bullshit.
You think? I don't. No, I think me and you think that. But I listen to a lot of fucking just like dude podcasts, and they still say that shit. And then their guests all say that shit. So I don't know.
I can't imagine thinking that. The level of cognitive dissonance to think that. I'm not claiming that like we're smarter than everybody else, but just like pay attention. Have you been on the internet?
How many internets could an internet czar save if an internet czar could save internets? See? It's simple, guys. How many B's could an A X if an X could B A's? Or if a B could X A's? God damn it. It's simple. Look at the meme.
You could
ships, shipping
Google
ships, the internet, what? Sorry.
Google's a verb and a noun. You can Google. Google's Google.
Google. Yeah.
There you go.
I wanna know more about these fuckers that deny phenomenal existence.
You don't want to know more about them.
Oh, okay. Maybe I don't.
Okay, we'll talk about the attempt to explain intentionality without any sort of phenomenology next episode.
No, let's not.
All right, so that's this episode. If you wouldn't mind going to our Patreon for Owls at Dawn and joining the group, we're pretty close to the 25 amount, wherein we will allow all of the patrons to produce some. I think what we're going to do is have them just kind of give us options, and we'll narrow it down to like 7 or 8, and then the patrons will vote on it. And so you can suggest and then eventually choose topics from a list that we can address in future episodes, as well as get our newsletter every month and access to the bonus episodes, one of which we just released as an addendum to our previous episode, the last one we did on Prozorov, the Prozorov Book Club. So you can do that. You can also go and find us on Twitter, owls_at_dawn, or email us at owls@dawnpodcast@gmail.com. there anywhere else they can find us?
You can go on Facebook. We have a Facebook page now. So Owls at Dawn podcast, I believe it is. But if you just search Owls at Dawn, you should be able to find us.
We're all over the internet now.
Yeah, we're on the
Internet's
yeah,
beautiful.
exactly. So we got to do this until Troy becomes the internet czar and starts cracking down, and everything is just a basketball website, and that's the only thing you can ever do. So hurry up and like us now, and before that day comes.
If I'm the internet czar, I'm gonna be like the classic like Plato's Guardians, right? I'm gonna be like removed from the society in a sense. Like I'm gonna be living in a cave somewhere as a hermit. I'm gonna be
you'd be like the idiot that like what was his name, Simeon Stylitis, who's on top of the pillar standing above the city.
Yeah, and I'm gonna be making
the holy
pronouncements
fool
about the internet without knowing anything about it. It's gonna be great.
Yeah, that's perfect. Yeah, and if you could go to iTunes actually and leave us a 5-star rating and a review, that would really help get the podcast out there as well. Thank you guys so much. Definitely, and check out that article, and don't hate on religious people, man. You know, we all got our weird fucking foibles, and I don't know. It's an interesting article, and breaks my heart, but fuck, man.
You can be wrong and still be worthy of conversation or dialogue.
Exactly. All right, brother. Is there anything else we got to do?
Just one more.
What up?
Das Vidania, Amerikanski.